Well, welcome everyone. Good to see you on our community calls. Honestly, I thought there'd be more people because it's 2/2/2/2 Tuesday, right? Like we should all be partying on that. And I was really excited we have Eve here on this special day, super special day. And maybe you've met Eve before, but she's got a lot of wisdom to share, both light and shadow of what COVID-19 has brought us and unexpected outcomes. And really, I'm going to let Eve take it away and we'll do announcements at the end because just what she has to share is so rich. So thank you, Eve, for sharing.
Thank you, Justine. Hello, everybody. Happy Tutu Day. I feel like we should all be wearing them. So this is exciting that we are all together. And I'd like to share with you sort of the outline for today so you know what we're all getting into. We're going to be sharing a video that Pearlstone created a year ago, 1 year into the pandemic, so that we can see a little bit of how we started out and what was happening in the world and how we were responding. Then we're going to go through to a PowerPoint and I'll be sharing with you a lot of the things that Pearlstone did, both the good and the hard. We're going to stop at some point for a breakout so that we can all have a chance to process. And then we're going to talk about where we go from here. But I think with that format, you'll have a sense of what to expect during this chat and how we can share this time together. And definitely don't wait till the end to ask me all sorts of questions. I know that I come from a different practice than many of you and a different relationship to my work, and I'm really happy to share the space. So with that, why don't we start with a video. This is from Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is the festival of the trees, which happens in early February. So if you think about where we are in the pandemic, this is a year ago this month. Go for it, Ben.
We rise, humbly hearted rise, won't be divided, rise, with spirit to guide us, rise, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here, and we rise. All of the children rise, elders with wisdom rise, ancestors surround us, rise. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here, and we rise.
Okay, so those were images that were both global and Pearlstone alternating back and forth and back and forth. So you could see what it was like a year ago and how we were responding. Before we go any further, I thought it would be really nice to just take temperature in the room. So in the chat, if you would just put an adjective or two of how you're feeling about the pandemic right now. Are you feeling over it? Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling exhausted? Where are you with this pandemic right now? And let's just have a little bit of empathy in this room. Yeah, a lot of these resonate with me. I too am exhausted. I too am hopeful somehow. I still stay optimistic through all that we've been through. And it's nice to be with compatriots. I feel like part of what the pandemic has done is cause so much isolation that it's really important to be in space with other people who are feeling similarly. And with that, I want to show you a bit more about the organization I work for and some of the things that we've done, because we both have done amazing things that we're really proud of and we're happy to share with everyone else. And there's been real cost. And I want to talk about those too. So with that, Ben, why don't you open up the PowerPoint? For those of you who don't know me, I am the COO of both Pearlstone and Chazon. We are the nation's largest faith-based environmental organization. We also have 2 campuses, one in Connecticut and one in Maryland. And at the time that I joined the RCC, I was just the deputy director of just one of those, Pearlstone, because during this pandemic, we've also experienced a merger. And we'll get to that. But why don't we start with just Pearlstone and what 2 years of the pandemic has meant. Next. So this is what it looks like at our campus. We are leading a transformative movement, weaving sustainability into the fabric of Jewish life in order to create a healthier, more sustainable, and more equitable world for all. Next. If you had come and asked me what Pearlstone was before the pandemic, I would have said that there were 3 things that we were really critical as the DNA of our mission, and they were living Judaism, connectedness, and loving warmth. And that loving warmth would have been the way that we define all of what we do to ourselves and with each other. But living Judaism is how we do what we do. We bring Judaism and Jewish values to life. And you should know that we do that embodied with Jewish values and immersive Jewish experiential education. You'll hear that a lot through this presentation. We sometimes shorten that to JOFE, Jewish Outdoor Food Farming Environmental Education. But you'll see that there's some Hebrew here, and that may not be the language you use to describe your work and service to others. So welcome to my world for the next hour. Hachnasat Orchim is one of the mitzvot. Mitzvot are the 613 laws that we are commanded to do in the Old Testament, and it is the one of hospitality. And you will see that there are lots of pieces here in which we will explain how we do them and how we put societal issues like climate justice, ecology, food justice, and civil discourse into a Jewish framework, because we think those in fact are Jewish topics. Next. So if you came to Pearlstone, you would have seen 180 acres of gorgeous landscape, and there would have been places to play and pray and stay. Next. It would be an awesome place to have retreats and special events. It's very beautiful on our land. Next. And we would have had conferences, day meetings, reunions, and in fact, somewhere between 18 to 22,000 people come to Pearlstone itself every year pre-pandemic. And of those people, 50% would have identified as non-Jewish, because they would have either thought it was close to BWI, or they love the environmental sustainability aspect or the farm to table food. But 50% of them, even though it's living Judaism, would have felt that that resonated in their non-Jewish experience. Next. We can have meeting spaces all the way up to 250 people in a room, so a big place to have conferences, even though, as you can see, running around the ceilings, there's Jewish context in each of the spaces. Next. We would have said how awesome the lodging was. There could have been in hotel style rooms, dormitory suites, beautiful log cabins, and now with the pandemic, many more lodging options, which we'll go over. Keep going. And just introducing you to it, because we're a Jewish organization, nothing says welcoming like food. We're a kosher institution that makes amazing 50-foot from farm to table cuisine. And we really, really do showcase plant-based foods. Keep going. And we would have had lots and lots of people's life cycle events, weddings, b'nai mitzvahs, family reunions out in our campus. We would have told you about all of the pools and all of the lakes. Keep going. It would have been all this stuff to really get the whole beautiful experience of what you can do on our land, right? Keep going. And you could play with the animals in the farm. Like, this sounds like an idyllic place to come and enjoy. Keep going. High ropes adventures. Can you imagine? Like, there's all of this cool stuff. And we have a whole education team with 12 employees to be able to take you on instructed high ropes, low ropes, edge experiences. Keep going. And we're known for ecotourism and sustainability. In fact, even the hot water in the kitchen is heated by that solar coil on the roof. Just in the kitchen alone, the entire surface is all solar panels, a whole lot of sustainability in action. Keep going. And we were really seeing ourselves as the Jewish future, because so many people in the Jewish world right now do not identify as members of a synagogue, but they do see themselves as culturally Jewish. So where do they find that enriched Jewish experience? More and more, it's at camps, it's at retreats, it's in belonging in public spaces that feel inherently Jewish and help create and cultivate life cycles for next generations. Keep going. 90% of Pearlstone participants said that their motivation to make the world a better place is driven by Jewish values and traditions. And 98% of Pearlstone participants felt connected to Jewish religion and customs, even if they didn't identify with Judaism itself, because they found them so earth-based, land-focused. Next. We had these amazing impact plans where we broke out all of our outcomes and our indicators for how that living Judaism, connectedness, and love actually become transparent in all the work we do. Keep going. We had lots of ways in which we broke down all of the aspects of the farming we do to really have it resonate with our core values. So you can see, like, there was this whole robust inherent system to all the programming, all of the land stewardship, and all of the hospitality. Keep going. We were connecting people between Judaism and earth-based practices, connecting to a spiritual self, appreciation for the earth. These are global concepts in a Jewish construct. Keep going. And our trajectory at the end of fiscal year 19 was that we were going to have about, all in all, about 22,000 people. Our hospitality gross sales alone were just under $3 million. For some context about our size, just as Pearlstone, not all of Chazon, not Isabella Friedman, just Pearlstone. That's where we were. And when you add all of those things together, sustainability, the farm, retreat, programming, we had a really robust set of core practices already in place. And then, next slide, devastation hit. Within the first couple months of the pandemic, we lost millions of dollars in contracted events. This image you're looking at is actually a fire on our campus. We do prescribed burns. We see the value in burning it all down to the ground and letting new life grow. And at the time, at the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't see the pandemic that way. We just saw it as the fire and not what the fire brings. But instantly, everything changed. Next slide. The sudden cancellation in retreats brought about a huge economic impact and a huge reduction in force. The numbers have changed now because we're slowly starting to be able to hire some back, but we had over 60% of all of our staff have their positions eliminated within a couple months. We did many things. We did the PPP loans, we extended people's healthcare, but we could not sustain all of the positions. And we had to see our beloved team members leave. Next. We had to create pivots, which is an awful lot like flying a plane while building it. So retreats, programs, stewardship, all had to come up with immediate new pivots and new directions that had to stay mission aligned and not mission drifted and not go after where the money is, but focus both on our income and our impact. That's a lot to ask for people who are really hurting with a much smaller crew. And we got to work being really creative and really successful and really tired. Next. Here's what we've done in the last 2 years. We've been open and we've hosted groups the entire time. I know many other retreat centers closed. We, even before vaccinations, remained open. And during this whole time, and even during Omicron, we have stayed open and have always been exceeding the COVID protocols of our community, whether that's our county, our state, or the federal government, or CDC, and have had to learn all of the COVID protocols and put those in place in hospitality. We have prepared over 115 emergency food response meals. We opened a food delivery service. We opened 2 Airbnbs on our campus. We crazily changed what campus rentals could look like. We provided emergency housing. We partnered with over a dozen community organizations. I'll tell you a lot more about that. And our summer camp and farm and forest school attendance increased over 400%. All of those kids that were doing virtual school needed a place to get out and get out safely and get away from their screens. And Pearlstone was a place where all of a sudden outdoor education became critical for those kids' mental health and connectedness. And we became a huge location for that. And as I mentioned, there was a potential merger happening during this entire time. We're going to go into some of those pieces. So what happens when an immersive experience is not possible? We tried to create what were our objectives and hold true to them. One was community service and impact, and the other one was organizational resilience. Yakir Manella, our CEO, and I, and others in our leadership team wanted to make decisions that protected the positions of as many of our existing staff as possible and kept them employed and doing meaningful mission-based work. Let's see a couple of those. Next slide. So we opened Pearlstone Kitchen. This is our delivery service. If you can't come to us and eat our crazy great food, let's get it on the road and bring it to your house. So like a restaurant where you can have the food delivered, we started delivering food. And the people who had been the managers on duty in our retreat center got trained in serve safe food delivery, safe service, and delivered the food out. And it was a moneymaker, and it kept some of our culinary team and our managers on duty employed. And people loved having this food brought to their house as opposed to others because we're a nonprofit they were supporting as opposed to another kind of restaurant's choice. Keep going. We delivered our farm to people's tables. It was in the first year about $14,500 just in the menus itself, none of the special events, none of the add-ons, and that was all unbudgeted revenue. So a good start for a fledgling business to be in the black and to move forward. And we started selling my favorite, which is our ahi verde sauce, which I think should go globally, but hasn't hit your supermarkets yet. Next. It also kept all these people employed. One of the things that was critical to us is that really good people who were so mission aligned and working so hard could be really celebrated for what they do and could get their food and out into our community. Next. So tzedakah is the word that Rabbi Assis uses in this quote. It's a funny word to translate into English because what do you think of that means charity, but you're obligated to do it, so you can't do it because you're a good person? It's that thing. Tzedakah means giving to others in need, but without some sense of your own tithing. Thank you. Helpful. So tzedakah is equally important to all the other mitzvot put together. Instead of 20,000 visitors coming to Pearlstone, through our various pandemic programs, we brought our mission to over 200,000 in the first year. Next. We also started emergency food response. Baltimore City youth in Baltimore City were really dependent on their school lunches, breakfast and lunch, and now all of a sudden the schools were closed. So the city was trying to reach out to who could do volume, and in 2 days we did 2,000 brown bag meals for them and thought, oh, maybe this is a thing we can do, and started to pivot in that direction as we built it out. So then we built out with a lot of other groups who were all starting to request foods in their own directions and in their own needs until we could get the funding and the grant negotiations underway to see how we can make it viable. $500,000 later, 115,000 meals. We figured out a couple really important things about the emergency food response systems. Next slide. One of the things we figured out is that you can do it as reactive in March, which is really early on in the pandemic. We were just winging it and all hands on deck, fill bags, let's get them out the door. Let's make sure these kids have meals. Keep going. By May, we realized we could have grants to be able to establish partnerships with some of the groups that we had as partners for the last 5 or 6 years on our land doing our own educational programming, and now we could bring food back their way. Oh, this is a new thing we learned, and that's sustainable. Next slide. By June, we realized that there were programs where we could deliver weekly straight out of our farm, which is the image over on the left, and those are our farmers bringing our product straight out into Owings Mills High School as a distribution hub, so that our certified organic produce goes out rather than it becoming prepared meals. And that's something we continue to this day. Our farm continues to produce. Keep going. We also realized we could have a lot more partners. These are lots of new folks we had never been in relationship before. And once we figured out what our capacity was, which was making nutrient dense, high calorie soups, stews, and casseroles, and that we would do them in larger quantities, thus alleviating the food insecure person needing to stand back on that line for every meal, but be able to get more food all at one time in a consistent, repetitive way. We could then have relationships with lots of other organizations doing great food. And we know that we are a Jewish organization and therefore not necessarily the organization right in the community where the food was needed most by people facing hunger and food insecurity. And so rather than being the people at the end of the delivery, we provided the resources to the great partners already in that community doing great work themselves and shored them up, rather than trying to compete or replace them. So a huge fundamental difference about who's in charge. Next. You know what else it did? It kept all these people employed. This is my team. Next. It also kept us connected to volunteers in our community who really wanted to do something during the pandemic, but weren't sure how or where or what was safe. And they couldn't feed 115,000 people, but together we could. So they came every week and helped us fill and prepare all of the orders. Next. And the partnerships now have a life of their own. We've been able to go on and do many different things. Our Thrive monthly programming out on our campus now partners with one of our partner organizations each month to bring their expertise and knowledge to our space and our land now that people are returning to our campus. Next. In Kamacha and Torah, if there is no flour, there is no Torah. This is from Pirkei Avot, which is the ethics of our ancestors. It's just really a basic fundamental saying that if you can't start with bread, there is no Torah. And for us, we really tried to stay true to mission at all time and stay back to basics. Keep going. The other thing it did is it allowed us to go out and hit so many different areas within Baltimore City and Baltimore County. All of these different partner organizations are in many different zip codes in many different areas. And so we were really able to spread out what we were doing. And we know that there is a rise of anti-Semitism in the world right now, and being able to be a Jewish organization in partnership with lots of different zip codes is a really important way of seeing us and seeing our hearts and trying to mitigate one-on-one some of that prejudice that exists in the world, and was a great, not even tertiary, but really great other positive from this enriching experience. Next slide. 60,000 meals in the first year and 115 by the end of 2022. And you know what we were? Tired. This is exhausting, and the supply chain to get all of that labels and delivery schedules and food was exhausting. And the commitment to making sure that some of the food here was the same as the food we sold for Pearlstone Kitchen, our delivery, so that there was no difference between the people who could afford the food and the people who could not in terms of the product, was a great mission, but it wasn't inexpensive. And each one of those budgets was exhausting to build and manage. And remember, there were so few of us. So we were really passionate about it, but we were really small and tired. Next. While this was happening, we also realized we should feed the front line because if we've got a food delivery pipeline, let's take it out to the hospitals. So we had a partnership with 2 different hospitals in our community, and the fact that we're kosher means we could also be in the Jewish hospital as well. So people could spend 20 bucks and donate it, and we'd bring a meal to anybody in the hospital that needed it. And we try to do it by whole departments and feed them all at once, particularly not the ER, who gets a lot of the meals in a hospital, but all the other unsung heroes like sanitation, who without them, there'd be no hospital. So we brought meals to everybody. We wish this was a bigger project, but we definitely coordinate it as well. Next slide. So you can see some of the people we're feeding. Yep, keep going. There they are. Next. While this was happening, we started with virtual, and then we went to all of that on-site programming, and we produced a ton of different programs, from embarrassing videos on YouTube where you're cooking with me in my kitchen, all the way out to Tour of the Earth and Grow Your Own with Pearlstone and Wilderness Adventures, but really wonderful ways to get connected virtually and then in person. And we'll talk more about Farm and Forest School and TUL because those turn out to be really big programs. Keep going. This is a part of our campus, and we started to realize that it was enough to separate out kids in pods. So for our Farm and Forest School, we could do 9 pods of 12 kids 3 or 4 days a week and keep them all in their own separate areas on campus to adhere to our COVID protocols. We also employ security at our front door, and you have to pass a daily health screening. There's a mask mandate, there's a vax mandate for all our staff, a whole lot of COVID protocols we had to put in place. But in terms of logistics, we have enough land to be able to make a lot of pods possible. And while that's great for all the education and the health and safety for all of those kids that were out and the parents who trusted us enough to let them all come, the education team's pretty tired too. Next. So we felt our role was to create innovative content and format, especially within the JOFFE framework. And as I mentioned, JOFFE is Jewish Outdoor Food Farming and Environmental Education. This quote above it from a participant I think is really important because it helps people understand their Jewish or non-Jewish identity, but it also helps them become interested in food and food justice. And it shows them a earth-based Bible practice that is true in many faiths about honoring the land that we live on and making choices. And so that's a key component of the curriculum that we teach. Next. We do really cool things like build structures and teach people how to hike at night and make fires in the rain. And we do that through a number of different engaging programs called TUL, which is our adventure camp, Farm and Forest School, and Family Farm Camp. And all of those have separate national funding. Keep going. And part of why we do it is because we say it drives cultural change. As you can see from the testimonial from a parent of a kid who went to Farm and Forest School, it really was important for them during the pandemic. They recognized in their kid a passion for nature, and they got to really be connected to nature, infused with Jewish and ancient wisdom, and help him be a caretaker and good person in the world. And that's kind of the goal of why we do what we do. Keep going. Lots and lots and lots of different kinds of outdoor programming was all in place. Keep going. And a lot of it was really focused on immersive transformational experiences. But see Stern in the bottom left corner, just standing in one of our streams with kids jumping straight at him. That's what it felt like for a lot of our team. It was just nonstop coming at us, and we were trying to keep the world safe and everything okay with all of the different programming we were trying to do all at the same time. Keep going. Next one. Oh, TUL, got it. So TUL, we have a summer camp that became incredibly popular and busy. Next slide. And just absolutely filled with people really excited about sending their kids to day camp and getting out from really, really stressful times in school. And one of the things we learned is how much more mental health we needed to be able to provide for kids this year during the pandemic. Keep going. Ben, I'm not sure why these have Zooms in them. So not my doing, but interesting. Just a ton of kids all out in our land, all experiencing it. Keep going. And we got national programs. So JFAM is the Jewish Family Camp, and TEVA is a national program for day students to be able to come to one space and have a week-long 5th grade or 6th grade overnight experience. They now happen at Pearlstone. Keep going. While this was happening, we decided to buy a property on the outside of our property and convert a building we already owned and turn them into something called getaways. People weren't willing yet to go to public spaces for vacations, but if they could rent an Airbnb on our land and take advantage of all our campus amenities and get Pearlstone kitchen food delivered, they could have intergenerational vacations and getaways. So we started to have a ton of those in our cabins and in our 2 Airbnbs. Next slide. Here's what they look like. We put kitchenettes in all the cabins. We did all the interior decor and started to rent out the 2 properties. And it was very, very successful. They have been sold out now for most of 18 months. Next slide. We did them both in the log cabins and in the 2 homes. Keep going. We also worked with a TV show to have all 11 episodes of Project Fire shot on our campus and used their COVID protocols for TV shows as a way to utilize our space and also market and advertise our space because it's in the intros of every one of the shows. And you will see that really awkward picture because I was on one of the episodes cooking with the host. So feel free to mock me all you want. Next one. Okay, we're going to go into breakouts. I think it's important for us to talk about some of the victories and challenges that we've been facing in our own retreats, some of the choices we made at Pearlstone about financial and employee impacts, and where you see some similarities. So we're going to divide into some breakouts and spend a couple minutes doing that. Justine, how many minutes do we have?
14.
14 is good. Why don't we jump in, just share with each other, how's this landing for you? Any of it feel similar? Any of it feel impossible? Or any of it things you now want to start to think about in your own space? And then we'll come back together and talk about those. Well, I hope that time in smaller breakout groups was meaningful for all of you. I'd love to hear from a couple of groups, some things you reflected on, and then I will pivot and tell you sort of the state of Pearlstone now and ooh, happy merger and what does this all mean? So happy to do that as well. But first, if there's anybody who wants to offer some thoughts, this would be a good time.
Eve, I was curious, you had a refrain about, you know, how like, here's the wonderful thing that happened and then we were exhausted. And here's the wonderful thing and then we were exhausted. And I was curious, I feel like I can really see the long-term, like thousands of years development of cultural values in Judaism, like creating this fertile soil for all of the creativity and the adaptability that has been embodied at Pearlstone over the past couple of years. And I'm wondering about the practice of Sabbath and how that, you know, great thing happened, we were exhausted, and then what? And maybe that is part of your next, you know, here are the next steps.
I love this. That's wonderful. So I'm going to teach you all a word. Tell me if you're familiar with it. Does anybody know what Shemitah is? Yeah, some know what Shemitah is. Every 7 years, we let our land lie fallow to rest and restore and heal itself. We are currently in a Shemitah year. I cannot think of a better time globally than the you need to stop what you're doing and do less moment than right now. And so I think it's really wonderful that even in our Jewish calendar, we are in Shemitah. We are in the regroup, figure it all out, build for a better tomorrow, stop doing all the stuff moment. In fact, if you can, see how much extra and surplus you have and give it away is really a message for right now. So perfect timing, because not only do we have a a Sabbath, a rest every week, but we have a rest every 7 years to restore that we're in right now to take stock of how tired we are. So perfect timing to give us a chance to breathe and figure it out, which is what we're in the middle of doing right now. Yeah. Anybody else have other reflections from their breakout before we go into where we are going?
Eve, I was grateful. It felt like we went through a whirlwind, which I imagine is what the last 2 years felt for you. And just taking this moment of breath. And then also what I needed to do for myself was pull myself out of comparison. Like, oh, well, Kirkridge and Pearlstone, and that's not what you have implied, but it was easy for me to fall into that and say, okay, but then what were the key takeaways, and how has Kirkridge really thrived both in turning inward and aligning mission with doing new things? Like, doing new things doesn't mean mission drift, but really what called. And Kirsten had mentioned kind of the 2 tenets you held up, which was just beautiful. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course. Shamati. Shamati means I hear you. When you are done saying something, you could say Debarti, and that is what I have to offer. And someone else can say Shamati, and I have received it from you. One of the things, Justine, that was a reality of the last 18 months in my own life, being the COO and the self-imposed stress, was that I got an ulcer. I physically could not manage this without there being a crash. My body saying, you're not taking any of our hints. You are actively bleeding and in pain. So please understand that as much as I hold up how awesome this was and how it saved Pearlstone, please understand there are real personal and organizational costs. Okay. Great. One of the other things I heard from my group that I want to share with everybody was a financial model. How did you do all of this? Where'd the money come from? So let's be transparent. A lot of my CEO and our board knocking on doors and getting funding right in the moment for these crazy new concepts we were going with. And emergency food did not stay sexy. So it was hard to keep saying, like, look at this amazing thing we're doing, please support it, because it went out of vogue pretty quickly and people were focused on other things. And some of the things I thought we did, which were the most powerful, were not the most funded. But we also had a model with all of those cancellations that I just shared with you. And this is not the law. My poor director of sales and our guest services had to negotiate and go up and down with every group leader. But our hospitality side is a profitable side of our organization. And in general, our model for people who are canceling when we could hold the event was that we held them to 25% of a forfeited deposit, 25% we refunded, and 50% we held for them to be used for a future event that they had to rebook. Which means we have a lot on the books that we have to move down the road. But it did make us feel like we weren't just pouring out from a cash position. So I offer that as well. And with that, Ben, would you jump into, so where are we now? Okay, so we're merging with Chazon, which catalyzes that Jaffe movement, Jewish outdoor farm and food environmental education, working on leadership development globally, creating those immersive experiences and thought leadership, driving those kinds of systemic changes both on the Jewish world and in the universal world in general. Chazon is a national organization with incredible programs like the Seal of Sustainability. Please go check out what we're doing on our Chazon webpage to learn more about us, but a really important environmental action, food justice organization, climate justice organization. Our CEO was at COP26. We are really in the thought leader group about environmental change. Keep going. Which means that we had to make sure we were doing justice at home. So we brought in experts. Yavila McCoy is a Black and Jewish leader in the Jedi movement. Keshet is for LGBTQIA plus equality within Judaism. We brought in national organizations to make sure that the way in which we were pursuing justice internally was in line with who we wanted to be, and did some internal training. Keep going. And we started to, on top of everything else, keep our master plan going because we had a lot of stuff funded on our land. And while we weren't as busy as we thought, let's get it built. So you saw those getaways happened. The ropes course got up and happened. The bunk houses, bathhouses are under construction now, as is the retreat expansion. Keep going. And we are now working on the outdoor amphitheater on top of everything else. We also had an enormous stream restoration and rain gardens happen on our land during this time as well. So really huge, beautiful movements forward for our own land stewardship. Keep going. We're also super involved in solar programs in our community. We are working with the Federation for a solar farm called Community Solar, which means that about 50% of the electricity for all of the different organizations in Maryland that are under the associated will be offset. And we put up solar panels on all of our own retreat center. Keep going. And as I mentioned, some new projects on the land, that huge, gorgeous stream restoration project, 5-acre stream valley restoration that is part of the Chesapeake Bay with hiking trails and sit spots on it. And if you're into Judaism and need a place to be cleansed, there are even mikvahs in this stream. The bathhouse and the pump house are up, and we're now under roof for the lodging edition where we've put up 25 more hotel style bedrooms. Keep going. And with our partnership with Chazon, we are more active in climate justice than ever before, and really working on how we are participating from a Jewish point of view. Keep going. And what we are doing with systemic change. So I hope my friend Brian on the call is seeing, I'm calling you out here. Let's talk about systemic change and our partnerships nationally with other organizations. Chazon has the seal of sustainability. We also work with lots of other groups, Repair the World and Hillel, Jewish Federations, JDC, all might be other Jewish organizations you might want to know and grow with. Keep going. And we'll still be focused on immersive transformational experiences, but now, instead of them just happening for Pearlstone at Pearlstone, which is 180 acres, now we're also in Connecticut at Isabella Freedman, which is 400 acres in the Berkshires, and trying to make sure that all of the education, hospitality, programming, and land stewardship that are there in that beautiful campus are as deep and as rich as they are in Pearlstone. Keep going. So that any kind of experience, whether you meet us on our land or whether we come out and meet you on yours, still maintains the same sort of mission focus of loving warmth, of living Judaism, and connectedness. Next slide. So the key takeaways: more Jewish inspiration. Those of us who've been through the 2 years are very tired. This was traumatic for all of us. But a student must not only learn what one prefers, but even where one prefers. Always learn Torah in a place that your heart desires, from the Babylonian Talmud. Next slide. And Pearlstone is a proven, consistent, recognized success because of our deep adherence to the core brand values and strong culture of nimble innovation. These values and culture have served us well, even amidst the pandemic, and position us for exponential growth and success far into the future. And that fire we saw in the beginning, if we think what it grows and what happens after a fire, we have a strong new sense of learning to build from in the years to come. Next slide. Here's who we are. Here's who we've always been. And here's where we're going. Questions for me? Next slide. Sonia has a question.
Yeah, I'm wondering where you're at with the with your vaccination protocols and whether you've lost a lot of staff as a result of implementing those. And I guess I'm also wondering for my colleagues who are on the call, I mean, we're considering a new way of approaching a vaccination protocol around kind of requiring up-to-date vaccination rather than kind of getting into the specifics of boosters and stuff like that. So just wondering where you've been and where you are.
Great. Pearlstone has a vaccination mandate for all staff. We do allow for waivers whether those are medical or religious. And if there are any employees who have approved waivers, there is a protocol for routine PCR testing for those individuals. We don't tell the community how many people that might be in our organization because that's HIPAA law, and we won't divulge who is and who is not vaccinated. We also currently have an indoor mask mandate regardless of vaccination status for all who come on our land, and that hasn't changed even though our state has opened up indoor spaces. And when many of our groups exceed that and have PCR testing negative results for all people who come to their programs, and then rapid tests daily while they're with us. But that's usually something that a group leader mandates, not Pearlstone. And so that's an interesting piece when we're running it, our own immersive treats, like Pesach is coming up, which is a huge deal in the Jewish life. We run Pesach immersive retreats at both Pearlstone and Isabella Friedman. All of the guests must come with negative PCR test results in order to be checked in. So there's a whole lot of pieces we do on our own. Some of the other protocols we have in place include using different kinds of cleaners. We have very high rated filters for our air movement systems. And we have trained all our culinary team in not only all of the general health and safety food stuff like Serve Safe, but also the specific ones to COVID protocols. There's additional ones to take and be certified in. Those took many, many months and are ongoing challenges. Let me not minimize the work to be able to move a whole organization into a vax mandate state. It is not currently true for all of our Chazon counterparts while we go through this merger. So I just want to be transparent that it's very complicated. One of the blessings of being in Baltimore is one of our friends of Pearlstone is a Johns Hopkins public health advisor. How did I get so fortunate? And so every one of our protocols is reviewed by an international expert who just happens to knows this stuff and reviews them for us. And so we're able to say, not only is this Pearlstone's position, but it's been vetted by an expert in the field, because I'm an expert in hospitality. Other questions for me?
Eve, this is Brian. You had talked about in the pandemic and even with the merger with Chazon, this intention of partnerships, and curious just to hear a little more of how that transpired. It sounded like the partnerships were probably more around particular programs, or was, but just curious how much was outward facing partnerships and how much is inward. That's obviously a big question, but
it is, and it's sort of a buzzword, right? Because there are partnerships
right.
that you have with funders about what you're gonna organize and be able to have and do successfully and within your own framework. And then there's partnerships within community that might be community-based, like resources that you then can partner with, like our soups could go out to Baltimore Gift Economy, a partnership in Baltimore City that could then provide those 150 quarts of soup twice a week out to individuals. So there's those kinds of partnerships. And then there are partnerships with organizations that you grow a relationship with and they have their retreats every year on your space, or they start to feed some of the fellowships you run with new educators, for example. So it depends on which kind of partnerships. They're all critical. One would be very silly to think one could eat an elephant by oneself. And so we really think all of those are important, and cultivating those relationships are meaningful. But in terms of some of the pandemic specific local Baltimore partnerships, one of the richest parts of that experience with like that map I had of all those new organizations was that there's real wisdom in those spaces that we can learn from. And rather than thinking this is a one-way tunnel in which we're providing a resource to somebody in need, if you think of it in terms of two different organizations with real wealth to offer each other in different ways, it's reciprocal. And one of the things that has meant is, I was mentioning in our small group, for example, Eric, who runs Black Yield Institute, which is an urban farming program in Baltimore City, has now come out to Pearlstone and led workshops because he's an expert. And how rich to be able to have people come out and learn from him on our land, rather than just thinking we could be providing food and services that direction. So real ways in which engaging with people for the first time over a specific program doesn't mean that's the only time. There's so much more to then grow and explore. I want to be real careful about time. Make sure we're all doing good, Justine and Ben. We have time for a couple more questions. Are we still fine?
We are still great. And Maureen, did you have your hand up?
Yes, Eve, I just can't get over the transformative change that you've been able to do during a time when a lot of organizations failed or really cut back so much. I know you cut back and did it with so little, and that's why you're all exhausted. But do you have any wisdom about transformative change and what most helped it happen? Maybe that's not a very good question, but I think you know what I mean, that you've done something that even on a small scale, some of us might try to model. But what was at the basis of that? Was it your Jewish traditions, the values?
So what a great question. I'm not sure I'm going to get the answer right on the first time because I feel like I have to chew on this a little bit. One of them is actually just thinking we could pull it off.
Belief.
We really thought, all right, let's just go figure out how to do this. We can do this. It's just now building out process. We know how to create structure and systems. Let's go build it. And each individual program or project wasn't so bloody hard. It was trying to do all of them at the same time and trying to do all of them and wanting them up already. Like some of them were silly, like let's get all the furniture and the decor into the Airbnb when we get it cleaned and painted in like a week, and let's get it out onto market because there's people who already want to rent it. Like that's just silly. But my first response, Maureen, is just, we really thought we were the ones to be able to get this done. We were needed in the moment. We were who we had. We were going to figure it out. And I have the luxury and the deep honor of working with incredible people. And I'm not sure every team has that level of rock stars. And I can't take any credit. I came less than 3 years ago. Some of them have been around a lot longer. This is not a team I hand selected, but I am so grateful to work with people who can really pull it off. So in terms of capacity, we had the people and we had some of the funding. We just didn't have enough of the time. And if you got 2 out of the 3, you should go for it.
Thank you, Eve. That's very helpful.
If I can chime in for a second, I think another thing that I'm noticing is the willingness to experiment and then be a little bit creative with tweaking the experiment as you go to see where it really fits best or who it fits best with or in what scale. I think I tend to, and I don't work at a retreat center, so I tend to think a little more narrow about what a retreat center does and how it does it. And you were able to think more creatively without mission drift. And I think that's the tricky navigating that you were able to do, where a lot of retreat centers don't offer food in the first place. So that just wasn't even an option for them. But how are they connected to the community in ways that they could build, but we don't think creatively about ways to tweak it to make it work. So that's something that I keep spinning around about, is that you did that in so many different little ways that made a lot of those programs possible.
Yeah, I'm also going to say, because now I've had a second to keep thinking through Maureen's question, I'm also going to say institutionally, we don't have a hierarchy structure that requires the boss to approve every individual step. So I wasn't in the way of really smart people making a lot of decisions. to be able to figure out how to get this done. We had a lot of like, everybody catch each other up, who's doing what systems of communication. But I don't feel like this is such a top-down organization that everything had to go through senior leadership for every decision. Here's your budget, everybody is a budget manager of their own areas. Here's your own teams. Give us updates, but let me get out of your way.
Yeah.
I think that helps too.
Mhm.
And we're not perfect about it. We screwed up. I think one of the other pieces is it's okay to fail. What did you learn from it? Where are we going? But definitely get out of the way of really good people doing really good work.
Eve, could you talk a little bit more about something that, you know, didn't work and what allowed you to, you know, do it? Stop.
Sure. This may be a little in the weeds, but I think this will help. When we got the 2 Airbnbs up and running, we just assumed, oh, they were on our property, so they'd be kosher. So we could maintain like, oh, kosher space. Instantly, we were like, what are we talking about? People who come aren't necessarily kosher, and are we paying our mashgiach to come every week and re-kosher all of it? And do we have 2 different sets of everything? And operationally, how in the world are we doing this? So then instantly they had to become not kosher. And then all of the kosher people would come and somebody would say, yeah, sure, we'll kosher it. And what does that mean? And under what levels? And who's going to do that? And then we don't have any staff to do it. So there were like those kind of stumbling blocks in which we built something, but we hadn't lived it long enough to figure out some of the flow of how to make it happen. That's not make or break for a retreat center, but for the person trying to book that, and for the person then trying to get it ready, and for the 2 people who are the housekeepers of the entire organization zipping around from the retreat center rooms that we had as emergency housing, and we still had groups in house, and we were doing all these cleaning protocols, over to the Airbnbs and get them ready. It was like, what are we doing, guys? We need to build a system here. So there was a lot of that in which we started going one direction, and then there would be like a huddle up. Wait a minute, we need to figure out how we're going to operationalize this, because there were so many pieces we just hadn't lived to think through. And those eat up your day. So then it's hard, if you're putting out fires, to continue to create and grow the next thing.
And just a really tactical question, is you're sort of managing through all of this, are most folks remote, or are they on site? Because it seems to me, and just it's back to your reflection on Maureen's earlier question about having the autonomy to make decisions, like how you're in communication and connecting with folks, and seems really critical to your ability to move forward.
If you were in the departments that were running the retreat center or the educational programs or the land stewardship, which is a lot of departments, you were on site every day. So maintenance, culinary, retreat services, hospitality services, programming, land stewardship, every day out somewhere in their own spaces, coming to work every day. If you were an admin like me, you were probably not at work for months and months and months, and somebody is watering the plant in your office for you. And one of the things that did to our team is it isolated us from each other. We had the gift of our kitchen making us staff lunch every day. We all eat together, and it's a chance for that collective time. We didn't have it, and it hurt our culture. So a lot of us were out of the room, but people who work with their hands to get stuff done were all there every day. Yeah. Other questions for me, or other thoughts about what this means for your own space?
Did you have any COVID cases or things you had to worry about in the midst of that? I think that's what a lot of us fear the most, that we would be a petri dish.
Very, very, very few, God willing. The very first one, Shavuos, I think 2 years ago, is that right? Somebody left because they were having symptoms and popped positive, and sent letters to everybody who worked for us and everybody who had attended, and we paid an outside organization to come and do COVID level cleaning in the room, because at that time nobody knew that it wasn't a surface-borne virus. So thousands and thousands of dollars later and 1 million follow-ups with everybody, nobody else popped positive. We had been transparent about all of it and we had learned. And then most recently around New Year's, Christmas time, we started to manage people who had either had direct exposures or people who were popping positive from outside of work exposures. And just the whole litany of how many days till you can return and what kind of testing results do we accept was a whole lot for a few of us in the organization to continue to stay on top of and manage and figure out how to do the tracing ourselves. So that's a lot of steps, and is a reality to people who don't live on your site, going to live their real lives and when they can return. But our daily health screening wouldn't have let them come onto site. So it was just back tracing and then doing all of that tracing and communicating. And thank God, all of our folks are all okay, knock on wood. We have, of course, because we're a mid-sized organization, we have had people who have been impacted by trauma and loss within their own communities, their families, but not at Pearlstone.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions for me?
Did you have did you try to onboard any new board members during the course of the pandemic? Because we did, and we had very mixed results with that. I mean, you were talking about how difficult it is to maintain morale among the staff when they're not sharing space, but like getting board members engaged when they're not having any face-to-face contacts was like extremely difficult.
Thank you. Yes, we've had a few members roll off the board and a few members join our board. I think 3 members joined our board this last go around. We're currently in a July 1 fiscal year. Again, with the merge, everything's changing. So that then will change again for us, and we'll go into a January 1, but it'll also change the terms of the board, it looks like, and who's on a board, and is it a national board, and are there advisory boards? Like, all that's in motion. But we did onboard several, and I'm really, really grateful for their experiences and expertise that they bring to Pearlstone at the moment, and their energy, you know, learning about who we are and what we do as an organization. They really add a lot. So I'm excited by that too. I see what you mean, that it's hard for that culture to maintain too if there's a lot less in person. How often does your board meet, Sonia?
We meet together as a full board 3 times a year, and then, you know, have monthly committee meetings. And we have gone back to doing 2 of the 3 meetings now on site. But when we weren't doing any on-site meetings, we had a number of different board members join and then resign after a certain number of months for reasons having nothing to do with the pandemic. But in my opinion, it was like they were just insecurely kind of attached, you know?
Understood. Yeah, Shamati. Has anybody else experienced one of the real hardships we're experiencing now, which is the current hiring market? We are desperate to find a few more people. We have positions open, and especially in the hospitality, but not only in our fields, we are having a super, super hard time. And if you know people who want to be a part of our movement, please send them our ways. But did anybody else feeling that too? I'm having a real hard time hiring.
Eve, I'm just gonna name, and it's actually like the last announcement, is our next community call on March 8th, International Women's Day, is about inclusive hiring practices. And so we'll have Christine from Fetzer actually talk about their learnings, and then Francisco and Hannah from Pendle Hill talk about, they had just completed a compensation study, and they've also been a present voice about their difficulties. And we have seen an increase in advertisements for director, hospitality, the auxiliary positions. So yes, we are definitely in this together. So March 8th, 1:30 p.m. Eastern time.
Beautiful. Like I knew that was coming. So that's awesome
did I say
because there are some real hardships. Part of why we're so tired is this is a lot that we're doing and business is back online and we don't have the capacity built back yet. So those who were tired through the last 2 years, now we're being asked to keep holding a whole lot together. We would love to have some more people on our team. Great. Well, I really want to thank everybody for coming to hold this space together to talk about pandemics. For many of us, it's the last thing we want to talk about right now after 2 years of trauma and pain and sickness. But sometimes naming it allows us to take back control and to talk about what we can do in the face of real scary moments and adversity. And I'm happy to share all we went through at Pearlstone and now at Isabella Friedman and Chazon. Stay tuned for the actual official merge when we're together and what we're off to do. And we look forward to partnering with all of you. Brian, I said partner, so partnering with all of you in ways that are even unknown at this moment. But if we can be a resource to anybody, I look forward to it. The last slide, Ben has all my contact information. Feel free to share that. You can also find me on any of those websites, Chazon or Pearlstone. But yeah, happy to offer whatever experience I have, and thank you all.
Thank you so much, Eve. You gave us so much to chew on, and I really appreciate the duality of like, here is this inspiring work, and it was exhausting, just holding all the realities of humanness in this. And it is good for all of us to touch base with that in the reality of 2 years of a pandemic and the trauma that's come from it. So I just, so much gratitude, Eve, to what you're doing, and thank you for sharing with us today.
Of course. Honestly, my honor and my pleasure.
Be well, everyone.